Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. Right, and today we're going to be talking about skill class. Now this is going to be like a little 6-episode mini series, me breaking down every single class in the game, the class's strengths overall and kind of like common characteristics, class's weaknesses, and some of the best uses for some of the champions, some of the top champions in each class. So today's topic, as I said before, is going to be skill class, and we're going to break it down bit by bit. Right, so let's jump right here to Outmate, who is a very great source to gather information and also just kind of like have a better picture. And skill class currently in the game consists of 33 different champions, of whom 23 are tagged as heroes, 5 are tagged as villains, and 10 are tagged as mercenaries. Now here is already the first interesting point. In skill class, we do have 5 champions that double up in these primary tags. We have 5 hashtag hero and mercenary champions. Sorry, we have 4 hashtag hero and mercenary champions, and we have 1 hashtag villain and mercenary champion. If you do know this bit of trivia, please feel free to leave a comment in the description. But moving on to the strong side of skill class, and if you have to name the 3 most characteristic features of skill class, number 1 that comes to mind is definitely damage over time effects. Nearly every single champion in this class has access to some sort of form of damage over time effects, with the exception of Black Widow, OG Daredevil, Karnak, and Stealth Suit Spider-Man. I believe every single other champion in skill class can inflict damage over time effects, which is again something that frequently is beneficial, sometimes can be annoying that you do need to split out your damage output between several multiple sources. Therefore, in total, there are more, let's say, ways how nodes or champion abilities can dampen your damage output, but access to them is very important and vital nonetheless. Now, another thing that skill class is extremely common with are shrug off and purifying abilities. In fact, about half of the champions in skill class have some sort of form or way to shrug off or purify or get rid of debuffs faster. So basically, skill class really does not like debuffs. And also, interestingly, skill class is pretty much the only class in the game currently where champions can place debuffs on themselves to strengthen their abilities, which is quite interesting. It started with Deadpool Hell's Kitchen, now we have Kingpin. I'm sure I'm missing something out there, but those 2 champions definitely have abilities that place debuffs on themselves and thus interact with their abilities even further. But in general, skill class really does not like having debuffs on them, and we have a ton of great examples of abilities to purify, and some of them are actually more interesting that you might have potentially not known. For instance, Night Rusher can purify debuffs whenever he's knocked down, and then obviously we have our more standard purifying champions like, I don't know, Kingpin, Hitmonkey, Deadpool Hell's Kitchen, Crossbones now, so on and so forth. So that is definitely one of the biggest featuristic strengths of skill class, that they either have abilities to purify debuffs or abilities to benefit from debuffs being placed on them. Let's say Killmonger, he gains power when debuffs placed on him. Now, another very, very frequent ability that you will notice in vast majority of the skill champions is ability to reduce ability accuracy in your opponent. We can see that Aegon, Agent Venom has that ability. Both Black Widows, Blade can do that. We have Crossbones who can do that. Elektra, Daredevil Hell's Kitchen, Falcon, Gwenpool, and a whole bunch of others. Karnak actually can do that as well. So that is a very, very common thing in skill champions. Basically, they can make opponents' abilities unreliable, and they can make sure that opponents' abilities will not trigger, which is quite interesting. And though that kind of like sums up the skill class in general. Damage over time effects, shrugging off debuffs, and lowering opponents' ability accuracy would be like the 3 most common things in skill class, and those are also would be their strengths that skill class kind of like sticks to. You can see that with Jabari Panther, a champion that's released, well, just about to get released properly. She's like a perfect representation of skill class overall, kind of like a cookie cutter skill ability set. You have bleeds, you have damage, you have ability to deal with debuffs, and you have some sort of form of evade slash miss prevention in there. So that perfectly describes a skill champion as Kabam are creating them. Now, what are the weaknesses of the skill class? And the first and possibly the biggest weakness is that the skill class has no power control outside of three, let's say, relatively crap options. Now, there are only 3 champions in this game who can actually reduce opponents' power gain in any way, form, or fashion, as far as I'm aware. And those are Winter Soldier, which is like the most literal example because he can quite literally power drain the opponents, and I believe is pretty much the only champion in skill class who can power drain the opponents. Wait, Hawkeye is there as well. 2 champions, Hawkeye and Winter Soldier, power draining the opponents. My bad. Then we have a Stealthy who has a pre-fight ability to set his web cartridges to end weight, but I'll be honest, his end weight is pretty useless because it has very, very short amount of duration time. And then we have Gwenpool, who also has end weight, but that's a very, very kind of like, well, it's still better than Stealth is, but end weight overall is not very strong form of power control. And then technically, if you want to count, we have Moon Knight, who Awakened can reduce opponents' combat power rate. I believe that's just about it when it comes to skill class reducing opponents' power or controlling opponent's power. So that is a very, very weak area for them. Another weak area is lack of immunities. Obviously, typically in skill class, it is replaced by this ability to shrug off debuffs, but it might not always work. Sometimes it's unreliable, or sometimes you just flat out need that immunity because these damage over time effects are passive. So for instance, just because you can shrug off bleed debuffs with Kingpin doesn't mean that if opponent has access to passive bleed, it will work. Or just because Nick Fury can shrug off all debuffs whenever you knock down the opponent doesn't mean it will actually work against EMP modification, which again is a passive effect. So, albeit this con of skill class is largely mitigated in most of the scenarios by their abilities to shrug off debuffs, it's still something that the class in itself suffers from quite greatly in a lot of different situations. And there are, the best I can point out, only 3 skill champions that actually have like immunities as such, and that would be Night Rusher, immune to Incinerate, that would be Korg, immune to Bleed, and that would be Maulman, immune to Shock. The rest of them are not really much so. But again, keep in mind, they do have abilities that mitigate debuffs or shrug debuffs off. And the third lack, so let's say the third missing proper ability, would be that none of them really have great access to special attacks, with a couple of exceptions. Whilst in pretty much all the other classes, you can find champions that have several different avenues of gaining power, typically. Skill class is quite behind pretty much everything else in that regard. Now, we do have Blade, who has very potent power gain mechanic, and we do also have Night Rusher. Now, there are a couple of champions like Moon Knight and Elsa who can increase their combat power rate, but it is not quite a significant help. And then there are some other conditional situations where, for instance, Killmonger can gain power when he gets debuffed. But in general, you don't really have skill champions that have very easy and constant access to special attacks. Therefore, quite often nodes like, I don't know, Power Shield and stuff like that might not be skill classes forte per se, because you do want big special attacks and you want frequent special attacks. But those are kind of like the 3 biggest things that are largely absent or very, very weak in skill class specifically. And we're gonna go over some of the best uses for skill champions. Now, it's no big secret that the skill class king currently is Nick Fury, who is actually pretty much good for every game mode. He's actually one of the most influential characters in the game right now because he's not only fantastic and versatile champion himself, he also has some of the best synergies in the game that help everyone. You can shrug off debuffs, and you can shrug off half the suicide masteries, thus making every champion pretty much semi-suicide friendly. You can grant a quote-unquote safety net by synergizing him with Quake, and both him and Quake being such an amazing champions. It's a very potent and popular synergy. And then obviously everything he himself brings to the table. Huge damage output, huge bleeds, debuff shrugging, unblockable, can't miss, can't be evaded, so on and so forth. So there is a ton of things, and overall Nick Fury is pretty much very great for every game mode. His use in Alliance War recently has dipped due to Protect Global, but he used to be one of the top Alliance War options, and without a doubt will be soon again. He's very popular in Alliance Quest and Abyss, and yeah, all the content where you can pretty much use him. People tend to use him. He's one of the best champions in the game. And the second champion that's kind of like a bit oddball case for most part is Aegon. Aegon is hands down the best Everest content champion right now because he's the most versatile. He might not have the most damage in the game, even though his damage definitely in Everest content is extremely respectable. The thing that makes Aegon so great is just how versatile he is. You can play him with and without suicides. You don't need to run synergy teams. Shrugs off any and all debuffs once he's ramped up. Therefore, he can effectively, in most cases, work as immune to everything champion, reduce opponent's ability accuracy, prevents the move from evading, has access to a ton of buffs, doesn't rely on special attacks. So there are a ton of upsides what make Aegon insanely amazing for any Everest type content. But the idea that he's only good for Labyrinth or Abyss is also extremely false. He's actually one of the Act 6 MVPs due to the exact things that I just listed, and the Act 6 fights being long enough to let him ramp up. And I'm sure he will still have a lot to say in this game in newer and different pieces of content. But in general, one of the kind of like strong sides of skill class is typically they are very fast and good questing champions. You can bring them into the fight and they can access a lot of damage very, very quickly without specific setup or ramp ups. Some of the best examples are Black Widow Deadly Origins, and she has some of the best damage output in, let's say, up to 10 to 15 hit fights, right? If you go for long fights, obviously she does fall behind some of the more versatile champions, but just for casual questing, super fun and super fast, high damage output champion. Similarly, Nick Fury, once his life model decoy is destroyed. Similarly, we have Mole Man, who is great for casual questing. Stealth Suit Spider-Man can put up a lot of damage very quickly as well. Then we have Falcon or Hit Monkey. All of these champions are insanely awesome when it comes to just bringing them in a random quest fight and finishing these quests quickly. On top of that, every single one of the champions that I mentioned also bring their own individual piece of utility. And in general, skill class used to be considered as the weakest class in the game. However, right now, I do believe that they are getting more and more decent specialist champions. I do not think skill class is going to be the dominant class in the game for, well, foreseeable future. But they do have these champions that do the same things that skill champions used to do. They just do them so much better now. That you can rely on it. You can reliably shrug off debuffs with Kingpin if you have Hood synergy. It's guaranteed. You can rely on those crits and damage and everything that Mole Man does and going unstoppable. And they haven't drastically changed the skill class with the recent buffs and recent additions, but they have just made it ever so much more potent. A great example is Falcon, who used to be one of the kind of like memes. People used to call him a dollar store Blade, but well, guess what? In fact, now he's much better than Blade because his ability accuracy reduction was always fantastic, but it's made better, it lasts longer, and his damage was improved significantly enough for people to want to use him and for him to emerge as one of the best options for some fights in Alliance War, and thus he's gaining a lot more popularity, as he should. Where the skill class is headed, I hope my personal wish for Kabam is to kind of like be a bit more creative with skill class. I think skill class is almost kind of like Mystic class, where they have like horse blinders and they have like a base set recipe. I want a skill champion to do this, that, and that's it, nothing else. And I wish they started experimenting with more and different skill champions and their abilities, because it is starting to feel like cookie cutting at this point. It's like every other champion, shrug of debuffs, inflict damage over time, reduce opponent's ability accuracy, done. We do need something a bit different from skill class. The reasons why science and mutant classes are so amazing right now in the game is because they have a wide variety of abilities, and skill class not really quite there yet. But that is about it for skill class. I will be breaking down next class in next couple of days, so stay tuned for that. And I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Leave me your comments and remarks, and I will catch you guys soon. See ya. Hello there, guys, and welcome back.